What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. IBF Super-Middleweight champ Caleb Plant, 20-0, is defending his belt against Caleb Truax, 31-4, with 2 draws and 1 no contest. This Battle of the Calebs is taking place on January 30th on Fox. Now, IBF champ Caleb Plant's name has been mentioned a lot in the past 1 to 2 years as one of the guys who would have a decent shot versus Canelo Alvarez because of Plant's slick style of boxing, quick hands, elusive defense, just an all-around adherence and practice of the sweet science of the sport. Basically the opposite of a bull in a china shop approach to boxing. Plant won his IBF title versus Jose Uzcategui, who kind of built his name in those back-to-back fights versus Andre Dirrell, the once highly touted prospect who lost a split decision to Carl Froch in that 168-pound Super Series tournament that elevated Andre Ward's name and fame, since Ward beat the guys like Carl Froch and Mikhail Kessler. Well, Andre Dirrell was a popular name in the sport at the time, but never really fulfilled his early potential. I think Paulie Malignaggi once said that as an amateur just coming up, Andre Dirrell is like the most skilled boxer he had ever seen. So by the time Jose Uzcategui fought Andre Dirrell, Dirrell was kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out of boxing. He was coming off a year layoff. Well, Dirrell and Uzcategui were fighting a competitive fight, and then Uzcategui hits Dirrell just after the bell to end the round. Dirrell goes down and he's out. This resulted in a disqualification win for Dirrell, even though Dirrell's corner member ended up sucker punching Uzcategui just after that, and all hell breaks loose. I believe there was even a criminal charge, if not conviction, related to that post-disqualification attack in the ring. Well, Uzcategui and Dirrell had their rematch nearly a year later, and Uzcategui dominated Dirrell this time, stopping him in the 8th round and capturing the IBF title. Uzcategui defended that title once successfully and then faces Caleb Plant, who really just put on the proverbial boxing clinic and really took Uzcategui to school, cruising to a unanimous decision win and capturing the IBF title. And Uzcategui is a good athlete and pretty busy and accurate puncher as well. So that was a very impressive win for Caleb Plant. Uzcategui, by the way, is only 1-1 since that loss to Plant, and hasn't fought once since the pandemic started. Something's telling me that even at only 30 years old, Uzcategui might have already seen his best days in the ring. We'll see. But newer and current champ Caleb Plant, an undefeated and flashy dude from Ashland, Tennessee, has now defended that title twice versus Mike Lee and Vince Feigenbutz, and won both of those via knockout, which was also Mike Lee's first loss. But Lee and Feigenbutz are hardly the names that come to mind when you think of the who's who in the division. Well, now Caleb Plant will be facing a solid challenger in veteran Caleb Truax, a former champ himself when he'd won the first of 2 fights versus longtime champ James DeGale in a major upset. This was also DeGale's first fight back after that hellacious war with Bout Jack. That was one of those career-altering fights for both guys. And if you look at their fight-by-fight history, neither DeGale nor Jack were truly the same after that fight. Seriously, this would have been fight of the year had the epic Anthony Joshua 11th round TKO over Vladimir Klitschko not happened during that same year. In fact, DeGale Jack was probably a greater fight than Joshua versus Klitschko, but the stakes were just so much higher, and the profiles of both Joshua and Klitschko, the momentous occasion, what was that, in Wembley Stadium too? So it was just a huge deal. So that actually panning out as a great fight kind of elevates that above James DeGale versus Bout Jack, even if DeGale Jack in a vacuum was a better fight. So yeah, James DeGale versus Bout Jack was brutal, and I think that in some way Caleb Truax benefited from being the very next challenger for DeGale's IBF belt. So Truax won the first versus DeGale, becoming champion for a moment, and then he lost a close decision in the rematch. But both of these fights were very rough and went the 12-round distance. And whatever DeGale had left after the Bout Jack fight was almost all but gone by the time he and Truax fought a total of 24 rounds over 2 fights. And then DeGale lost a lopsided decision versus Chris Eubank Jr., and then he retired. Now, Caleb Truax has a come-forward style. He's involved in a lot of head clashes, for instance. There were head clashes and cuts from head clashes in that second fight versus DeGale, and Truax versus Kid Chocolate Peter Quillen was just stopped due to a head clash in 2019. So, I mean, very few guys who are fighting Caleb Truax look like they're having a good time in there. Not that many fighters do, but it's always just kind of like a fight when people step in there with Truax. It's just bound to be a rough one. Now, although Truax is the best fighter that Caleb Plant has had to defend his belt against, I kind of feel like Truax's style fits Plant's style like a glove, on paper at least. So on one hand, the come-forward guy should be running into counters all day from the slick mover with the fast and powerful check hook, right? Well, Caleb Truax's fights don't usually end up going so by the numbers, by the book. Again, he upsets the slicker, more sophisticated James DeGale. Now, former champ Anthony Dirrell, Andre Dirrell's brother, knocked Truax out in the first round back in 2016. And in 2015, Daniel Jacobs knocked Truax out in the 12th, down at middleweight, 160. Now, before that 2015 loss versus Daniel Jacobs, you'd have to go all the way back to 2012 for Truax's only other loss versus Jermaine Taylor, who, I mean, he was the man at middleweight after beating the legendary Bernard Hopkins in 2 very close fights. So Caleb Truax is very rough and tough. He's pretty durable. He's knocked out many of his lesser quality opponents, but he is kind of hit and miss when he steps up and fights an elite guy. DeGale is really the only elite fighter Truax has beaten, so maybe there's a ceiling there. But you can still argue that that win over DeGale is still better than any one that Caleb Plant has beaten to date. I don't know, who's better, an old James DeGale or a prime Jose Uscada guy? But let's keep it real. Caleb Plant has looked outstanding in his fights. So brilliant, in fact, to where I think that some people's imaginations are starting to run a little wild. Don't get me wrong, he's got skills for sure, but we'll now at least get to see those skills tested versus a guy who's competed versus some of the cream of the crop. But I'm going to still go with Caleb Plant to win here. I was going to say via decision, but Caleb Plant needs to keep looking impressive. And Caleb Truax is now 37 years old. If he starts getting starched in the middle rounds, especially with punches that he doesn't see coming, he could definitely get dropped and stopped. We'll just see how well Caleb Plant is able to deal with Truax's pressure and roughhouse tactics early. That part can get uncomfortable for Plant. He'll have to find a way to seize control early in the fight and to at least give Truax reason to hesitate before coming in to bully Plant. But I think he'll figure that out with his movement, his jab specifically, and his hand speed. By the way, Truax is still ranked number 7 at Super-Middleweight 168 by Ring Magazine. They currently have Plant at number 3, ranked only behind Canelo and David Benavidez, the undefeated 2-time WBC champ, who only lost his belts due to recreational drug use and missing weight on the scale. Which brings us to the next question, which is, who the hell should Caleb Plant fight next if he gets past Truax here on January 30th? I'm thinking that because Canelo appears to be fighting Avni Yldirim next, then probably Billy Joe Saunders for a WBA, WBC, WBO unification bout, that leaves Caleb Plant without a unification opportunity or a truly big name to elevate his status. Now, it's no secret that promotional ties are what keep most of the best fights in boxing from happening, but you've got a situation here where the other best guy in the division, not named Canelo, shares the same promoter, or should I say advisor, as Caleb Plant, Al Heyman and PBC. And that fighter is the undefeated former champ David Benavidez, who really appears very talented. He's really tall for the division and has blistering hand speed and throws in combinations with mean intentions. Benavidez just dominated and stopped former champ Anthony Dirrell, not Andre, but Anthony Dirrell 2 fights ago. That's not only the first and only time Anthony Dirrell's been stopped, but that was also only Dirrell's second career loss. His first was 5 years ago to Badu Jack. But yeah, to me, David Benavidez really is the scariest non-Canelo fighter in the division, and this would be the guy that we want to see Caleb Plant fight if Canelo doesn't fight either one of these guys in 2021. And let's be clear, everybody at 168 and at 160 appears to be Canelo hunting. He is by far the biggest fish and the biggest draw anywhere near that division, and he's the one everybody wants to be in business with right now. The top 160 guys, Triple G, Jermall Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, they'll have to fight each other at 160. Or if they want Canelo, they'll have to come up to 168 and chase him there. And I think that that's unlikely to happen within the next year, but we'll see if Triple G makes the move in late 2021. But again, since Canelo's immediate plans seem to involve the mandatory challenger Avni Yldirim and then WBO champ Billy Joe Saunders, it would really be great for one of these other 168 guys to step it up and fight one another as opposed to fighting the Mike Lees and Vince Feigenbutts of the sport. It's just funny that the guy who's already proven the most in Canelo Alvarez and has taken on the biggest challenges up to this point is still the guy who's taken on the biggest challenges and working to prove himself the most out of all these guys. Caleb Plant and David Benavidez are both PBC Al Haymon guys. This fight makes itself, and Plant might be the one with the IBF belt, but it's Benavidez who might be the best non-Canelo guy in the division. Ultimately, you'd probably want the Canelo versus Billy Joe Saunders winner to take on the Caleb Plant versus David Benavidez winner. And this could all be more likely now, especially if Canelo beats Yldirim and Saunders because of his free agent status. He can work independently with PBC and Al Haymon to fight either Plant or Benavidez, since Canelo's stated mission is to capture all 4 belts at super middleweight. Now, if he was still exclusively on DAZN through Golden Boy or even through Eddie Hearn Matchroom, this would require one powerhouse promoter cross-promoting with PBC Al Haymon, which we just haven't been getting recently in these divisions where we want it and need it the most. This might sound like a 2021 wish list, but I think it's doable, and that would be great. But please, let me know what you think about this Caleb Plant versus Caleb Truax matchup and about the overall 168-pound division and the likelihood that either a Triple G or Jermall Charlo will either, well, they're not going to lure Canelo back down to middleweight, but which one of them, if any, are more likely to go up to 168 and to try to go hunting over there? Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.